On a hot summer night in 1988, Jane Borowski was stabbed 27 times by an unknown man. She was 7 months pregnant.
My name is Jane Borowski. I survived, and I remember everything.
Jane is the lone survivor of a serial killer. I'm your host, Jennifer Amell, and this is Dark Valley. Join us in our search for America's unknown serial killer. Subscribe to Dark Valley. Out now.
Slow Burn Media, an evergreen podcast, presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
Suffolk County investigators have been searching for evidence since 10 bodies were found on the beach starting in December of 2010.
Right now, based on the common denominators, the similarities of the victims, where they were dumped, the dismemberment, it looks like one person.
We have some breaking news. CBS News has confirmed police have a suspect in custody linked to New York's 2010 infamous Gilgo Beach murders. Authorities were reportedly on the scene earlier today at First Avenue and Massapequa Park. On December 11th, 2010, the first of what ended up being a total of 10 bodies was found. So we're going to have more information as we get it on this developing story.
Suffolk County Police will share new information in their investigation into the unsolved murders on Gilgo Beach. Suffolk County investigators have been searching for evidence since 10 bodies were found on the beach starting in December of 2010. Police are expected to disclose new evidence today, as well as a new initiative to share information on the cases and the new technology they're using to try to solve all those murders.
This morning, police are pouring through potential evidence they've collected from the Long Island home of Rex Huffman. Box after box removed from the crime scene. The architect and father of two has pleaded not guilty to murdering 3 young women over a decade ago. And now NBC News has learned that investigators in other states are looking into potential connections to more crimes.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of the LISK conversation with author Jesse P. Pollack. And this is an intense conversation, so enjoy. Well, that makes sense to a degree, because if you're trying to cover up a body, that would be the perfect thing to use, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, especially in that area.
Yeah, it's not like...
I hate to give the guy credit, but if it wasn't for Shannan Gilbert, he probably would have gotten away with it, because it wasn't that much longer after that Hurricane Sandy blew through, and that probably would have washed away all those bones. I hate to be that blunt about it, but I don't think we would have known anything about the bodies along Ocean Parkway if, again, Shannon's disappearance didn't kick off the search party in that area. I think all we would have known about was Manorville. But that was already a dead end by that point. You know, Manorville and Fire Island, those were going all the way back to 95, I think. And those cases were stone dead in the water. I mean, eventually DNA may have at least identified some of those remains, but as far as a connection to this other dumping ground along Gilgo Beach, I'm pretty sure Hurricane Sandy would have eliminated that. So, you know, whether Shannan was killed by the same person or persons, you know, I mean, it does matter, but I think people do need to keep her in mind every time the Gilgo 4 and the rest of the victims on that stretch of highway are mentioned, because without her, I don't think they would have ever been found.
That's a very good point. I mean, she was the catalyst to this whole situation, and to think that that was the catalyst and that we still don't have any answers for what actually caused her death other than the elements, it's so tragic. I mean, it's, you did an incredible service for the family. And by doing that, you know, again, like you said, we shouldn't have to beg people for DNA testing or audio engineers and stuff like that. It's one of those things that I feel, like you mentioned in the beginning, about how the family has not received any money or anything in relation to any of the movies that they've put out.
Yeah, it's kind of, it makes you sick to your stomach when you see Deborah Norville on TV bragging about, and here's a trailer for the upcoming Long Island serial killer Lifetime movie that I'm an executive producer on, knowing that, you know, Shannon's surviving loved ones are, you know, scraping to get by and struggling and had to rely on charity to bury her and to get, you know, some leeway done in her case. It's just, it is really hard not to get jaded looking at that, and I'm sure some people may think I'm a hypocrite because it's like, well, don't you also profit off of murder as a true crime journalist and author? And yeah, I do. I haven't gotten rich off of it. I'm certainly not paying every single one of my bills with my book royalties, but I mean, that's the cross that I have to bear too. I'm you know, I wrestle with that all the time. Is this blood money? But I'm also not out there going on TV with a shit-eating grin bragging about how, look at my movie that I made while completely ignoring the family. When I worked on the documentary adaptation of The Acid King, I had the victim's family, Gary's sister, I had her on set with me while we were filming in Northport, and while she did not want to appear on camera to preserve her privacy, she supported what we were doing. If she had told me, like, listen, like, I appreciate you writing the book, but I don't think we need a documentary here either, I would have said, okay, then we're not doing it. These other people that have profited off the sorrow of not just Shannon's family, but all of the other families in this case, I don't know, man. It's just gross. They've turned the morgue into a piggy bank. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And I mean, I'm in the same boat as you are, where I have to wrestle with the idea: is what I'm doing a good thing, or is it just...
No, you're doing good work, man. You're not out there bragging on Twitter about how you're the only show that has serial killers call in as guests. You know what I mean? You're not a ghoul.
This is true. This is true. But, you know, it is one of those things that you do have to wrestle with. And, you know, I was on a panel in the fall in Chagrin Falls for a documentary film festival about true crime ethics. And it's amazing how many people jump into this genre without having any journalist ethics, any journalism training, any training in regards to how to deal with victims and victims' families. And it's a shocking thing because there's so many true crime shows out there. And you just know that there aren't a lot of them that are really there.
You want some fucking tea? I'll give it to you. I wouldn't trust a damn thing on any true crime television show at all because the Oxygen Network once asked me to lie about a case on camera.
Well, there you go.
You want that story real quick? A couple of years ago, while I was in the middle of working on the Acid King documentary, a producer from Oxygen emailed me and set up a phone meeting because they wanted to cover the Casso case for a television show called Cults That Kill. And I had to explain to them on the phone, like, well, I mean, the whole point of my book is Ricky Casso was not in a cult, let alone led one. This was a drug murder among teenage friends. And the person who had made the initial contact and I was speaking with was like, shoot, full disclosure, Mr. Pollack, I actually didn't read your book. Like, this just kind of got assigned to me. Let me talk with the executive producer and I'll get back to you. And then this executive producer, he got on the phone with me, and I swear on my life, he goes, Jesse, come on, man. Look, I understand that Ricky wasn't, like, in a cult, but the show's called Cults That Kill. Throw me a bone here. Can't I get you on camera saying something like, oh, yeah, well, he said he wasn't in a cult, but if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck... And I told him to go fuck himself. I was like, no, are you kidding me? I just put out a book detailing in 450 pages why this guy was not in a cult. And you want me to go on your TV show and say, well, maybe he was. Like, this is how they operate. And if they did that to me, imagine what they have asked other people to do in the name of, we are trying to create compelling entertainment. So it leaves me, and I'm sure it leaves a lot of other people very jaded. But for any listeners that are shocked to hear about these tactics for the first time, seriously, question everything you learn about true crime if it comes from television. Do your own research, people. Examine the sources, examine citations, because you in this day and age, you really cannot just rely on, oh, well, it's a documentary on television. It's got to be true, right? They've got fact checkers and lawyers. They don't. They have lawyers that basically take one look at the script and go, is there anything here we can get sued over? No. Oh, well, they're dead, so you can't be sued over something like that. Yeah, no, you're good. Air it. They do not have like a team of true crime researchers and journalists and lawyers sitting around going, is this fact correct? Is this right? They don't. So question everything. Sorry, end rant.
Yeah, and I've been on those shows too before, where it's like the producer, the director is kind of just telling you what to say, and it is definitely a moment where you realize, yeah, you definitely need to take these things with a grain of salt, because you don't know what these other people who don't have training in this environment, how manipulated they can be and how easy it is to do so.
I've had ID contacted me a few years ago about the De Palma book, and they were straight up telling me like, oh yeah, like if you agree to this interview, like don't worry, don't be nervous, we're gonna have a teleprompter. And I'm like, oh, what, for the person interviewing me? Oh no, for you. You see, what we're gonna do is we're gonna conduct a preliminary interview first, and then we're gonna transcribe your answers, and then we're gonna rewrite them into compelling sound bites, and then you can just read them off the screen. And I was like, no thanks, I don't do the you put words in my mouth shit for maximizing advertising revenue. I don't play that game. I'm a journalist. I'm not going to sit here and be like some of these other disingenuous fuckers in the true crime world that are like, I'm a victim advocate, while they're selling, coffee mugs with a bloody knife on it or some shit like that. I'm a journalist. I choose the true crime stories to tell based on a very specific criteria, and it's usually if a sin or ill has been committed with the prior reporting. Like the Ricky Casso case, again, it was something where it's like, well, the media really screwed up on that one and said that this murder happened because of Ozzy Osbourne records and a non-existent satanic cult. Same with the Jeanette De Palma case. They said she was sacrificed by witches. Like, this is Halloween 3 or some shit. And that is where I can do a service. Like, I've had a lot of people and publishers ask me to write about other cases, and it's like, I'm not needed here. This isn't something where something needs to be corrected. And, well, this would be good for you. It'd be good exposure. And it's like, I don't really care. That's not what I'm about. And, sometimes you just see a lot of these people out there that pretend to care and pretend to be advocates, and they're just not. There are bad actors in every sense of the word. Absolutely.
And I know you have a tight, you need to get out of here in a few minutes.
I got like 20 more minutes, but
right.
I do got to circle back though to that transcript, because we got off the farm though.
Yeah, we sure did. And then we also have to touch on the Atlantic City case.
Oh yeah.
So go ahead and finish what we were talking about with the transcript.
But that whole diversion aside there, God, wow, that really turned into. I really hope your listeners don't think I'm like some asshole for flipping out on calling out true crime culture like that. But it's frustrating, man.
We've seen an evolution of things. I think anybody who listens knows that they're what is good and what's not, and I think, like you said yesterday, there's going to be a point where the bubble is going to burst, but.
Oh, yeah, because it did in the 80s. Like the late 70s through the early 80s, there was a precursor to this boom, and then kind of died out in the 90s, and even all the way up through the early 2010s, like we were talking about yesterday. There was a point in time where we were trying to get, and by we, I mean Mark Moran and myself, my co-author on Death on the Devil's Teeth, we were trying to get that book sold. No one wanted it. We were constantly told, like, no, true crime's on the way out. It doesn't sell, by these publishers, to the point where we're like, well, we're not trying to get rich off of this. It's just we really want to get the story out there. Can't you do like a limited run so the financial risk isn't huge for you? And they're like, no, we don't really do that. We want to maximize profits, etc. And then even once the book was out in 2015, we were calling up the newspapers in the county where Jeanette was killed and saying like, hey, could you do just like a little story saying there's this book out, so that her friends and relatives can be aware of it, and who knows, maybe someone will read it and like an important tip will get called into the police. Not really. We got too much, like stories to work on this week. Sorry, like someone did like a really cute photo shoot with their dog, so we don't have room for a story like this. But now that the book has become like sort of like an underground cult sort of classic within like the New Jersey true crime genre, now, newspapers are calling every anniversary. They want to do this, they want to do that. Like I said, the Investigation Discovery Channel has called me a bunch of times, and it's like, well, where the fuck were you people when we were trying to get word about this case out there so it could get solved? Now you're all interested because, you smell some money to be made. Like, it's gross. And again, look, I get it. People deserve to be paid for their work, and these are businesses. They're driven by money, but is it really asking that much to have some compassion or some ethics involved with true crime reporting these days? And apparently it is.
Yeah, it's tough, man. They're always trying to maximize every bit of profit, and it's basically the profit off of the victim, and it's very unfair, as we've discussed. And
yeah, they've got $1 million for Rex's wife, but nothing for the Gilbert family or any of the other families. Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite. I will say this: there was at least a significant outrage when that came out. I mean, I think,
but is it going to go anywhere?
No, I guess that's where I was going to go with that.
Yeah,
is because everybody can be pissed off, but is Peacock going to take back their money? No, but
of course not.
I will say that it would be interesting if somehow they find that she knew a little bit more than what she's letting on, and how that goes over.
Like I said before, a lot of stuff's going to hopefully come out in the wash during the trial. I don't want to speculate. Not that you're asking me to. This is just as an aside. No. Like, I don't want to speculate too much on that, whether she was involved or not. I just think it's incredibly gross that, none of these companies and corporations ever had any money to compensate the Gilbert family with, or Maureen Brainerd Barnes' family with, or the family of Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, Melissa Barthelemy, Valerie Mack. They had no money for any of these families, all of which are struggling and being exploited and having their privacy invaded. They're being, stalked by weirdos and nutcases and being harassed on the internet and all of this stuff. No money for them, but suddenly we've got money to, give her a check for $1 million and give Rex's wife a makeover. And, we've even earmarked $400,000 for her, ambulance chaser lawyer. Like, suddenly there's just an endless pot of money because, that's a great scoop. You can hear the TV spot for it already. For the first time, the wife of Rex Heuermann goes on record. And what's it all going to amount to? Honestly, like, is $1.4 million really worth, 5 minutes of her, throwing the tears on the camera going, I just didn't know. Because that's all you're going to get. What do they think she's going to say? Like, yeah, I knew the whole time. I helped him. Like, that's not going to happen. She's just going to say, I didn't know anything. But they have nearly $2 million at their disposal to pay her for a big old nothing burger for their programs, but nothing for the victims. And yeah, Rex's family are victims too. This is horrific what happened to them, and they've got to deal with it. But you can't have it both ways. If you're going to pay one of them, pay the victims too. It's enraging. Like, as soon as this guy got caught, all of the vultures came out to, get their little, hunk of meat, their pound of flesh, and how can we turn this into a money-making machine? And it's just fucking gross,
Yeah, it is gross. And with that being said, let's get back to the gross transcript that you had analyzed.
So going back to where we left off before, the interesting thing again with Michael Pack's story about, she ran down the steps, she fell, and then she just kept running past my car, and I had to chase her, yelling her name, and she wouldn't stop, and then I just lost sight of her, and I left. That's not what's on the tape. On the tape, she runs down the stairs unobstructed. She does not fall, but when she gets to the bottom of the stairs to the driveway, you hear a voice on the recording. I keep saying tape, but it was a digital recording. But if you hear me say tape, we're referring to the 911 call. But on this recording, you hear this voice, which I believe to be Pack, and Michael Whelan believed it to be, and so did Jeff Adamek, my, two members of this team that I put together. You hear this voice say, "Get in here," and then all of a sudden, you just hear the scuffle go on, like he's trying to manhandle her and throw her into the car. This is significant because there was a jacket Shannan was wearing that night that was supposedly recovered by the police in Joseph Brewer's driveway, and then it disappeared from the evidence room. The police also missed, when they went to Joseph Brewer's house, one of Shannan's earrings was found in the driveway. Again, not by the police, but by Shannan's mother and sister, who went to Oak Beach to look into things themselves days and weeks after Shannan disappeared. They found that earring, again, in the driveway, the same place where the jacket was first found by the police. So that makes sense with what you hear on the tape. I think Pack grabbed her. Maybe he was trying to get her into the car. Maybe it was something else. And Shannan, in her attempts to break free, her earring was ripped out and her jacket came off. And she keeps running. She's screaming. She's obviously freaked out by Pack trying to grab her. And for the remainder of the tape, leading up to her getting to Gus Coletti's house, you hear nothing that Pack said that he did. You do not hear the engine of his car start and then him start to follow her, shouting her name. You never hear Pack again on that tape. You never hear his vehicle on that tape. He just kind of vanishes from the recording after that. And it's not a quality issue. Even though, it is a low fidelity digital recording, you can hear some details on there that are striking. Like you hear birds chirping because the sun is coming up. You can hear what sounds like sandals on Shannan's feet, or I think it was dancing shoes, something like. Either way, you could hear the type of shoes that she's running in. That's how clear it is. But no, you never hear him start his car back up and pursue her in this valiant attempt to save her, like he always said to the police and the press that he did. And I find that very strange, because the police interviewed him very early on in the investigation, and they got a hold of the state police recording of the 911 call very, very soon as well. And they always said, well, we cleared Michael Pack as a suspect in her death because, everything he told us during the witness interview lined up with what's on the 911 tape. And that's not true. There are major divergences and differences between what he said happened and what's on the tape. He's always said, "Oh no, I never touched her. I was in the car and she just ran past me." No, he touched her. Whether it was an assault or a good faith struggle to get her in the car and get her home and get her some help for whatever's happening, who knows? But the fact of the matter is he lied to the press and the police just kind of shrugged about it, like, what are you going to do?
So we were talking about that Michael Pack part of the tape.
Well, again, I think it's very striking that his, quote unquote official story that he gave to the police and to the press is completely at odds with what's on the 911 recording. And yet he was cleared by the police as a suspect in Shannan's death and I'm quoting the police on that. They said at the time, like, oh, yeah, no, we cleared him because his account of what happened that night matches the 911 call. And it doesn't. It does not at all. And am I sitting here saying, Michael Pack definitely murdered Shannan Gilbert, or, Michael Pack might be one of the killers dumping bodies on Gilgo Beach? No. What I am saying, though, is I think it deserves a closer look by law enforcement and journalists, because that's a pretty big divergence in those two things, his story and what the tape says. And I mean, we're not talking about any fucking Boy Scout here. Michael Pack went to jail at least once for a human trafficking charge before he ever took Shannan Gilbert to Oak Beach that day. So, the fact that he is lying to the police and the press over the disappearance and death of an escort, it deserves a little more examination than the Suffolk County Police going, "Bap, he said he didn't do it. I guess he's innocent. Next." You know what I mean? It's frustrating.
Very infuriating as far as this whole case goes. I mean, it seems like a case that should have been solved a lot sooner than what it was. And it does make me wonder, like, with Shannan's body being discovered, was that the reason that Rex stopped committing crimes? I mean, or did he? I mean, there's all these questions, and we talked about how it's going to get all...
No, I believe Megan Waterman was I hate using the word dumped, like it sounds like you're throwing trash out, but I do believe Megan Waterman was killed after
Gilbert.
Shannan. Let me check that. It was either Megan Waterman or Amber Costello, because Shannan Gilbert was May 3rd, I want to say. Let me make sure I've got that correct, because that is a very interesting point that you brought up, because I had wondered that too. Like, is this guy going to stop and go into hiding now that these bodies have been found? All right, so she died May 1st, 2010, because here's the interesting thing there. Shannan vanished and presumably died the first week of May 2010, but Megan Waterman was killed in June 2010, the following month. So the incident with Shannan at Oak Beach, whether it was related or unrelated to the LISK killings, it did not stop the killings.
Right. That's kind of an odd thing. You would think that when something like that happens in your neighborhood, that...
Well, that's the weird thing, too, because I know what you're getting at here. It's you would think that, like, okay, for people to say, well, Shannan has nothing to do with LISK and the bodies on Gilgo Beach, they would say, well, you would think that he would stop, like she ran away and... the cops were called, and you would stop then. Or if you're not going to stop, you're going to stay the hell away from there. But the following month, Megan Waterman was killed and dumped only a few hundred yards away from where Shannan's body was eventually recovered. But I don't know, by the same token, it's weird. It's like Shannan Gilbert disappearing was a pretty, I'm not going to say it was national news at the time, but in the tri-state area, you think Rex Heuermann would have heard about that. Like, oh yeah, shit, a call girl went missing over where I'm dumping those bodies. I should probably stop dumping them over there. Mm-hmm. Or maybe had he gotten that reckless where he didn't care? I don't know. I don't really see that though. Like he's evil, and he's one of these sexual-based killers that can be really fucking scary, but I don't see him being like Ted Bundy reckless, like being like, oh, I don't care if I get caught by the cops that are obviously watching this area because there's a missing girl from that area. I'm just going to keep dumping. It's just a weird thing. It's like, how did he not know about it? And if he did know about it, why did he keep dumping there? It's strange. Again, hopefully a lot of this is going to come out in the wash at the trial.
Yeah, and again, I wanted to touch on this just because I've covered the case a number of times, and that's the Atlantic City 4 that were found behind the Golden Key Motel in, I believe it was 2000, mid-2000s, and those were all very similar MOs to each other. I mean, you could tell it was done by the same killer. Yeah. What is the chance that Rex had anything to do with those killings?
I'm going to, what was his name? He was the, I'm going to look this up real quick because he was like where that connection sort of began. And Dormer, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Dormer, back when the bodies were found on Gilgo Beach, you know, he was giving statements to the press saying, you know, we looked into it and we don't feel there's a connection. I think that was premature. Is there like any sort of like smoking gun there saying that Rex was also the what do they call it? Eastbound strangler?
Yes.
Not really, but I do think it's very interesting how many connections that Rex has to New Jersey. Not necessarily the Atlantic City area, but his first wife was from New Jersey. I believe they lived in the Brunswick area, and I believe it came out after he was arrested that he owns at least 2 properties in New Jersey, or did at one time. So, you know, I know Jersey's a big place and it has a lot of people there, but it isn't that far away. You know, Atlantic City and the Brunswick area where he was living I know he was living there in the 90s. I mean, it's like an hour and change away. So again, there's enough circumstantial similarities between the LISK killings and the Eastbound Strangler that I think now that we have Rex in custody, they need to take another look at this, and hopefully they are.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that they need to take a deep dive into and see if there's anything that could have connected him, because that case is completely cold. And so, you know, I guess we can say that there are multiple serial killers operating in the tri-state area at the same time. That's not that crazy, but
oh no, of course. I mean, Rifkin, I believe, was operating around the same time as at least some of the Manorville killings and all that. Because I remember the cops questioned Rifkin about that, like, were you also the Long Island serial killer? And Rifkin straight up said no. And Jersey has had several serial killers operating at the same time. You know, at one point it was kind of common thought that you could separate these killers by, you know, choices in MO, but it's now becoming more and more apparent that serial killers do switch up their MOs. I mean, look at the Zodiac killer. He was originally a couple killer, shooting them in and around their cars, kind of like the Son of Sam. But then he completely switches it up at Lake Berryessa and does it like a hostage situation and ties them up and stabs them. And then, you know, if you believe his murders ended it with this one, he caps it all off with the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. He gets into his cab, and once they get to the destination, he shoots him behind the ear. So it's more of a gray area now. It's harder to tell. You can't just rely on just, well, their MOs are different anymore. So as far as trying to figure out how many are active in the same general area, it's getting increasingly difficult.
Yeah, it certainly is. And especially with, I think, the proliferation of the internet and knowledge being out there as far as what cops are looking for and how to avoid them. And I think that's definitely plays a role in, you know, these criminals. Not that that's preventing them. It's more of that they're finding other ways to dodge getting caught. Whereas in previous years, you know, they didn't know about this technology.
In previous years, you could slip up in dumb ways and get caught. I mean, one of the most comical, if anything can be comical in what we're talking about, but I mean, like, are you familiar with how Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, was eventually caught?
Yes.
Yeah, the floppy disk. Like, you guys can't trace a floppy disk, right? No. Yeah, send it over to us. Caught him right. I think that era is over and done with. Just about everybody knows, like, no, they can track you on the internet. And it's no longer like with DNA. It's not like, oh, I got to make sure that I wear gloves and, you know, a hat or something so I don't leave a hair behind. Now we've got, what is that, touch transfer DNA, where even if, like, you get a little bit of your sweat on a surface, they can get your DNA profile off of it. You know, very, very small to the point of almost microscopic skin cell samples they can get your DNA from. So it's like unless you're walking around in a full rubber suit, like, you kill someone, they're going to find a way to get DNA, an eyelash, something. You know what I mean?
I mean, we've all seen Dexter or the first couple seasons.
Or how many different CSI spinoffs are there now?
It's crazy. And if you don't know that DNA is out there and that Google tracks you and that they can easily figure out where you are at any time of any day, it's just kind of like you have to accept it to a degree.
Google, cell phone towers, DNA, all that stuff. Like,
yeah, you see it in the Idaho case. Koberger getting caught up with the cell phone towers.
He was just an innocent bystander, man. Like, oh my God, that's a whole other tear. But the shit that his lawyer is saying, oh yeah, like he was in the room with them when they were killed, but that doesn't mean he did it. It's like, really, that's your defense? Holy shit!
That one I've covered that a few times. I had this guy. He's a defense attorney now, but he was a former prosecutor of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and he is that's Matt Mangino, and he's on Law and Crime, and you see him all the time. But we did an episode a couple weeks ago about the updates in the Delphi case as well as the Idaho 4 case, and he was kind of laying out what the lawyers were doing and all this procedural stuff, and it's just, it's amazing how much. I mean, we saw it with the Simpson trial. We're not dumb. Like, you can bombard juries with just endless amounts of information. Now, granted, we all know
it's
now
the Chewbacca defense.
That right. I mean, and we all know that Simpson's case is an outlier, but nowadays I just don't see how he's gonna.
Is it though? Is it really?
Well,
because there's a chick named what's Casey Anthony? Kaylee
enough,
was her daughter.
Enough. Good point.
It's
Good point. Never mind. Take that
dude,
back.
The fucking legal system in this country, it's better than some others, but we still got some fucking work to do fixing things here.
We sure do. Ugh. We sure do. And with that being said, let's get some of your plugs in. Where can people find you and get in touch with you if they want, or get your books?
Well, people can find me. My books are available just about any retailer. If you're the type of person that wants to make sure an author gets supported in the maximum way, definitely, if you want to check out Death on the Devil's Teeth, go to the Arcadia Publishing website to pick that up, because Amazon does not pay authors very well at all when it comes to royalties. The Acid King is available everywhere. I don't think Simon & Schuster sells it retail themselves, but you can pick it up on IndieBound. If you want to check out the documentary version of The Acid King, it's streaming. I believe it's on Tubi right now. But there's also a special edition Blu-ray with additional footage, commentary, etc. That's for sale at a number of retailers, and it's priced, admirably affordably. It's not like one of these collector's editions that are $45. I think it's like $15 or something. And I've got a new book that is coming out in, I believe, June. That's called Room 100, and that chronicles the Nancy Spungen murder case of Sid and Nancy fame, the famous Sex Pistols murder case. And if you want to check out some of the podcasts I do, as I mentioned before, I did a one-season podcast series on the Jeanette De Palma case that tied into Death on the Devil's Teeth. That's called The Devil's Teeth. Well, no, it's just called Devil's Teeth, sorry. Let me re-say that. I did a one-season podcast series on Jeanette's case that ties in with Death on the Devil's Teeth. That's just called Devil's Teeth. And if you're looking for more lighthearted true crime content, as I mentioned earlier, I co-host the True Crime Movie Club podcast, where we review/roast absolutely terrible direct-to-video and bargain bin true crime movies. If you love Red Letter Media and Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's right up your alley. And if you, again, you want another humorous take on things that occasionally covers true crime, I'm a co-host on Podcast 1289. That's Podcast 1289. And, if you like stuff like Last Podcast on the Left, and again, Mystery Science Theater 3000, similar kind of vibe. It's me and a few friends, and we just discuss the weirdest conspiracy theories and paranormal tales and occasional true crime content that we can find. just really stupid stuff. Like the one thing that I always come back to mentioning as a good primer for what we do on that show is we did a couple episodes on the quote-unquote conspiracy theory that Stephen King shot and killed John Lennon. Not Mark David Chapman. And no, not Stephen King paid for the murder of John Lennon. Stephen King himself fired the shots that ended the former Beatles' life. So if you want to know the kind of goofy crap we talk about, it's stuff like that. So if you're into stuff like that, definitely check those out. If you want to follow me, I am at J Pollack Author. That's JPOLLACK Author on Instagram and Twitter. So yeah, you can find that stuff there. And also got to give a big shout out to Weird New Jersey, who I have been writing for since 2001. There's 2 issues that come out every year. Doesn't matter where you live. You can get a subscription online. Still $5 an issue. And if you want to see some of my interesting reporting over the years, a lot of it true crime oriented, definitely check out Weird New Jersey. That's at weirdnj.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. It has been an absolute joy to get to know you and to have another great connection in the industry. And it's been great. So thanks so much, Jesse.
Same as well. I can't thank you enough for having me on. And this has been as much fun as you can have talking about gruesome and horrific and traumatic murders. But you know, I think you're one of the good guys out there. Again, you're not one of those ghouls. And so thanks again. I can't thank you enough for having me on. Now, with that being said, another podcast that I'm starting up now, there's only about 3 episodes out. It's called Unknown Horizons. And you don't have to put this in. We don't have to plug this or anything because it's still on baby feet. Okay. But basically, it's kind of, you ever listen to Coast AM with Art Bell? It's kind of like that. Like, we wanted to sort of like take back the cool, like paranormal, true crime and conspiracy theory radio, like take it away from the QAnon crowd and just be like, no, we're going to talk about cool stuff like Bigfoot and shit. But if you've got a fucking like a ghost story or like a true crime encounter, like we would love to have you on sometime. Like we just released an episode where we interviewed this video game designer. He actually worked on and named the video game Halo.
Oh, wow.
His name's Paul Russell, and he was almost John Wayne Gacy's final victim.
That's crazy.
Yeah, Gacy followed him home from school one day. It's a really fucking creepy story. If you go check it out, again, the show's called Unknown Horizons. The name of the episode is The Last Victim. Check that shit out.
Definitely. Hey,
but yeah, we'd love to have you on if you have anything that would follow that criteria. Or if
I'll have to rack my brain and see what kind of crazy. I mean, I've had some.
Have you seen a UFO? That also meets the criteria.
Not that I can officially say. Like, I mean, I've seen some weird ass stuff here in Denver. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Denver, but like multiple occasions I've seen just weird lights going up in the middle of the day.
Really?
Like, yeah, like they going into like storms and stuff. And like we've heard people have seen them and the weather people say those we're setting up weather balloons.
The classic like, weather balloon excuse.
The balloons don't function like the way that these things are functioning. And why can we see them so far
Yeah, we got to
away?
have you on talking about this. This is right up our alley. You'll like this show.
Hey, Jesse, thanks so much for joining me on Who Killed. It's been quite the adventure. I'm really looking forward to talking to you again in the future about other cases. And if you ever have another book that you want to plug, you're always welcome to come on. I've enjoyed this thoroughly, and I hope the listeners have as well. Again, you can find all of Jesse's books by Googling Jesse P. Pollack or going on simonandschuster.com. And you can also check out his documentary, The Acid King. And again, that's on Tubi. So thanks so much for Jesse taking time out of his busy schedule.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you guys for listening to this really interesting aspect of the Long Island serial killer case. And if you want to follow me on Twitter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of true crime, you can follow me at BillHuffman3. And until next time, as always, stay healthy and be safe.
Hi, this is Amy and Vanessa from She Goes by Jane, where we shine light on the stories of missing and unidentified women. On November 7th, we're sharing Nahita's story for the first time in a podcast. And this is a story that I thought I knew, but after reading police reports, became more complicated than I thought. When investigators are called to Nahita Khatib's house, everything looks fine. Her purse is on the kitchen table, her cup of coffee is on the counter, and her 2-year-old niece is in her playpen. The only thing amiss? Nahita is missing.
Every week, we feature a poem written in honor of the person we're talking about. This week, we're joined by one of our favorite actresses. You might know her from Sister Act or King of the Hill or The Descendants. But if you're like us, you'll know her from Hocus Pocus. She's the much-beloved Kathy Najimy. Join us November 7th to hear Nahita's story.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm Paul Brandis introducing my podcast, Countdown to Dallas. It's a fascinating, in-depth look at the seemingly unconnected events that led to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's based on my book of the same title. In that book and in this podcast, I go all the way back to 1939, when Lee Harvey Oswald was born into a troubled and dysfunctional family. I'll follow his transient and often violent teenage years and young adulthood, painting a fuller picture of the man who would later become Kennedy's killer. I also take a look at events unfolding in that era, like Cuba and Vietnam, and I'll unpack the conspiracy theories too, not one of which has ever been conclusively proven. Subscribe to Countdown to Dallas at evergreenpodcasts.com or your favorite listening app, October 31st.